there to do that? Yes, we can speak from here.
You can speak from here, and when you ask questions, then
Okay. Thank you. I'm just wondering how many young people there are here today. I'm told that it's mostly young people in the audience. I'm very happy to meet you because the young people have a lot to teach us. And when I go abroad, I usually go abroad, or rather come abroad since I'm abroad now, to learn rather than to teach. Usually I'm asked to speak. And so I have to speak, but I'd rather listen to people. And I much prefer dialogue to monologues. It's much easier, it's much more interesting, and you acquire so much more that way. But since I've been assigned a subject to talk about, I shall have to talk about it. Peace requires courage and compassion. First of all, I have to say that I had never previously, before I started out in politics, thought of myself as particularly close to peace as such. Peace was not something that I talked about too much or even thought about too much. It was perhaps something I took for granted, the value of peace. It was only after I was placed under house arrest that I felt close to peace, not because I was given the Nobel Prize for Peace, but because I found that being alone under house arrest was not something I minded terribly much, because I quite liked being peaceful. It was very peaceful living by myself. And it gave me a lot of time to think and to learn about myself, as well as the outside world. Paradoxically, you learn more about the world when you're cut off from it. I had only the radio to listen to, but I learned to listen very carefully. This was something I really gained from my years of house arrest, listening. When you listen very carefully to the radio and you don't see the face of the person who is speaking, you learn about certain nuances, and you learn a lot more about people listening to them without looking at them than you would learn about them when you meet them face to face. Many politicians whom I had met before I was placed under house arrest revealed themselves much more to me through the radio than they ever did when we met face to face. I learned that everybody has an agenda of his or hers, but the difference is that some are honest about it and some are not. So I much prefer those who, frankly, would say that they represented a certain group or interest or party and spoke up in defense of what they believed in or the organization they belonged to. The ones I learned to be very cautious about were the ones who always said that they were being totally objective and they were not taking sides. They were simply people who had studied the situation in Burma and they were going to present the facts as they saw it. Well, as they saw it. So honesty was something I learned to value when I listened to the radio over all these long years. And I think honesty requires courage. Honesty requires courage, and peace requires courage, because honesty and peace are very close together. To be at peace with yourself, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to know what you are like. You have to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then you learn to live with yourself, to be at peace with yourself. In the same way, if we want peace among ourselves, we have to learn about one another, including ourselves, and that requires courage. You have to have the courage to face what you have to do as well as what you are, and you have to have the courage to recognize the truth in others, even if you do not agree with them. So peace and courage are related, not because of the necessity to go out and march for peace, as some may think, but because of the necessity to be honest about what you may have to do in order to achieve peace. And peace is not easy to achieve. I do not think that human beings are by nature peaceful animals. I have a little dog, and some people tell me that he's a bad dog. And I always say, he's not a bad dog, he only bites. What's wrong with the dog biting? And he's very honest about it. He bites the people who come too near me. He doesn't like that. And so everybody knows what they have to do to avoid getting bitten. Now, if we human beings were as honest as he is, then we would know what to avoid to get hit or beaten or attacked in some way. So if people would make it clear what it is that they do not like and why, then we could sort out our differences. If only people would not cover up their preferences or what their real intentions with all kinds of excuses, we would get to peace much further. If we could know what the other side wanted, then we would know how much we could give and what compromise we could come to. Compromise requires courage, because compromise means letting go of your vanity. A lot of people do not compromise because they think that it's a sign of weakness. Of course, it's not a sign of weakness. Compromise is a sign of strength. It requires courage to face the fact that you must learn to be satisfied with so much and no more, even though you may want everything. You cannot have everything in this life, and you must be prepared to give up some things. And compassion, how does compassion come into it? Compassion also I learned to value during the years of struggle, because I've been fortunate enough to be given much compassion. And compassion is very strengthening. It is what gives you the hope and the strength to go on, whatever may be happening. And to know that compassion is a part of human nature is very encouraging. So why does peace need compassion? Peace needs compassion because compassion is also an element that helps you to give, to compromise. Compassion allows you to recognize that other people's needs are as valid as your own. And compassion is the most giving of all emotions. Only yesterday I was talking about it, and I mentioned the fact that love is very close to hate, but compassion is totally removed from hatred. This is why compassion is essential to peace. Love is not enough for peace because it could so easily turn to hate. It's too close to hate in some ways. But compassion is what recognizes the suffering in others. It's the desire to remove the suffering of others. It is the desire to put others at peace, and that in itself will give you peace. And peace has to be created by all sides concerned. In a situation of conflict between two peoples or two organizations, two countries, two groups, unless you recognize the needs of others, the other side, unless you can have compassion for the sufferings of the other side, you will not be able to come to the kind of agreement that will lead to peace. In my own country, we have had ethnic conflict ever since we became independent in 1948. There was never a time when the country was ever totally at peace, when all groups within the country had decided that they would lay down arms and live together in peace and resolve our problems peacefully. There has never been such a time. We are still working towards that goal, the goal when all of us in Burma, all different ethnic nationalities, will have agreed to live in peace and to sort out our differences through negotiation and compromise, and not through the gun. We have yet to get to that point. At the moment, there are many, many refugees in the north of Burma, in the Kachin state, where there is conflict between the Burmese military and the Karen Independence Organization. In such a situation, it's the women and children who suffer most. It's the innocent people, the ones who have never done anything to make conflict, who have never done anything to create conflict, and who have no say in the matter. Those who cannot say, we do not want the fighting to go on, we do not want this disagreement to go on, we do not want this breaking of peace. Those are the people who suffer most. And they are forced to flee their homes and live in refugee camps, which must be some of the least peaceful places in the world. And these people cannot live at peace because the powerful put other things above compassion and above courage. Courage is not just physical courage. Courage is not something that you display only on the battlefield. Sometimes courage means the refusal to go out onto the battlefield, to say, this is enough. The courage to say, we've got to put a stop to this. And somebody has to have the courage to say, this must end. And usually it's the people who create the conflict, who have created the conflict, and who are carrying on the conflict, who need to say this. Until they are prepared to stop, we will not have peace. Until they are prepared to put compassion and moral courage above physical courage and above the desire to achieve their goals, whatever they may be, we will not be able to achieve peace. We start with ourselves. As I said earlier, you have to learn to be at peace with yourself. To be at peace with yourself, you have to have the courage to face your weaknesses, and you have to have enough compassion for yourself, not to condemn yourself for these weaknesses, to be able not to live with it, because I think some weaknesses have to be worked at. You have the courage to work at your weaknesses, to try to change yourself. Peace requires change, and change requires a lot of hard work, and hard work requires commitment and courage. So it goes on. It's all linked together. Peace is a very simple word, but it's very complex, and often we can define it only in negative terms as to what it is not. I explained in one of my speeches that in Burmese, the literal translation of peace is the happiness that comes from the dying down of passions, the dying down of negative passions. So peace is not seen as something active, but at the same time, you have to work actively in order to achieve peace. For example, if you want a fire to die down, if you want the heat of the fire to vanish, you have to put out that fire. You don't do it by wishing. You have to move. You have to be active. We all have to run around, and we all have to get our little buckets of water and pour it on the fire and try to make it go out. You can't just stand there and hope for it to go out. Achieving peace is like that. We have to actively work in order to achieve peace, although the dying down of the hatred and the violence is seen more as a negative effect, something that has stopped. Conflict has stopped, hatred has stopped, violence has stopped, and that is peace. But in order to make all these negative factors come to a stop, you have to work very hard indeed. Nothing that is valuable in this world is ever achieved easily. I make a point of telling our people in Burma and the members of my party that nothing comes free in this life, because they must understand that we have to pay for everything in some way or the other. But we have to pay willingly. The old ancient Greeks used to say, in the days when they made animal sacrifices, live sacrifices, that whatever they ask for, their wishes, their petitions to the gods, can succeed only if the sacrifice is willing. They considered it a very bad omen if the animal that they were trying to sacrifice was reluctant and tried to struggle or tried to go away or showed great distress. Only if the sacrifice is willing can their petitions to the gods be granted. That is how the ancient Greeks looked upon it. Of course, live sacrifices, they were a barbaric tradition, but the concept that there has to be willingness in sacrifice is quite beautiful, except that the sacrifices should be from yourself and not through others. So if we want to achieve peace, we have to be willing to sacrifice some of the desires that are connected to our ego. We have to let go of our egoism in order to achieve peace. It's difficult because we are very, very attached to our egos. That's the way human beings are. And to let go is so much more difficult than to keep on gripping, keep on holding on. That is the kind of courage that peace requires. And compassion helps to develop that kind of courage. At least that's how I have found it in our struggle, that we managed to stay together because we have compassion for one another, those of us who struggled for democracy throughout the years. We wanted to help one another. We wanted to help our country to get better. If you like, it was compassion for our people, all of them, that helped us to go on with the struggle and to try to achieve a situation in our country where violence could come to an end and where people could settle differences through negotiation, through dialogue. For years and years, we asked simply for dialogue, to talk to those who were opposed to the values in which we believed, to sort out with them the differences that kept us apart. But for many years, the military regime refused the way of dialogue because dialogue they saw as a battle where one side must either win or lose. And perhaps they're not confident that if it was a matter of dialogue, they would win the battle. I tried to explain repeatedly that dialogue was something that involved give and take. It was not one side taking all, but give and take meant that you take some, the other side takes some, you give some, the other side gives some. It's give and take. Usually military people see give and take as I take all and you give all. And this is not how we can get to peace. And this is something that we had to work at over 2 decades. And I believe that we have made some headway. We have not yet achieved democracy, but I think the idea of sorting out differences through dialogue and negotiation is catching on. Even in the Kachin state, where there is still armed conflict, negotiations have not yet been officially broken off. There still are negotiations working towards peace. And I hope that these will be fruitful, and these will very soon achieve the kind of peace that we want in our country. The kind of peace we want is very simple. We just want permanent peace. We want the kind of situation where our peoples will no longer have to take up arms and kill one another in order to sort out our differences. There will always be differences because no two people can think alike. But we just have to learn to sort out our differences in a peaceful way. I think I've gone through the time that is assigned to me for the speech. And the next part will be the question and answers, which I think would be a lot more fun. I much prefer questions and answers to speeches, because with speeches, I never know whether people are sleeping or actually listening to me, or whether they're looking at their watches. But with questions and answers, because everyone can join in, it becomes much more animated. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you and to answer your questions, because questions teach me a lot. It's not just my answers that will give you an idea of what is happening in Burma or what we are looking for in Burma. Your questions will give me an idea of what you think is going on in Burma and where you think Burma is going and what you think should be done for Burma. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn from you. And I hope that the questions are the kind that will extract me from this jet-lagged situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Family, make her feel right at home. How about another round of applause for Aung San Suu Kyi?